Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm. Today you are most welcome here. Today I'd like to make some spring or Easter decor, and I'm really interested in using some colors and motifs that I don't usually see in spring decor here where I live in New England. So I want to go back to the sort of llama motif and some of those southwestern colors for these spring decorations. Let's go have some fun.
So I'm going to start with the clay look eggs, and I have a number of eggs here that I purchased at the Dollar Tree. Some of them are styrofoam eggs and others are the plastic eggs that you can open and close, and I have those in a couple of different sizes. So for the clay look eggs, I'm going to use the plastic eggs, and what I want to do is both make them easier to paint and obscure that seam around the middle, and the smaller ones even have a sort of little plastic hinge that sticks out from the egg. So I want to obscure all of that by paper macheing over the eggs. And you could probably skip this step if you wanted to. I'm sure you can paint the eggs without doing the paper mache step first. And if you wanted to paint them and obscure that seam, you could probably put some baking soda in the paint to make it a little bit thicker. That would give it a little bit of a texture, and that would hopefully obscure the seam. But what I wanted to do was this paper mache technique. So what I did was I mixed some white glue, regular white glue, school glue, PVA glue, you can buy that at the Dollar Tree or anywhere, and I'm actually using bathroom tissue here. It's 2-ply, so I've separated the plies and I've ripped it into small pieces, and I'm just using a paintbrush to apply some glue to the egg, and then I press one of the pieces of the bathroom tissue over that and then cover that with the glue water mixture, again using the paintbrush. And it's easier to do this in a couple of steps. So do one side, then let that dry, then do the next side, because the bathroom tissue will sort of move around if you try to touch it while it's wet, and it will stick to your fingers. So I did this in several steps. So here you can see I'm taking eggs that are already partially covered and finishing them by covering the other side. Now for some of the eggs, I'm going to use this Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint, and the color is Salmon Coral. And it actually looks a little bit darker once it's dried, so I think it is a little too coral at first, but once it dries, it looks a lot more like terracotta, which is the color that I want. And for each egg that I painted with this terracotta color, I mixed a little bit of burnt umber acrylic paint into the paint once I had finished, and a little bit of water, and I washed that over the egg. This was just to give it a little bit more depth and definition, and having put the paper mache on it before I painted it gave it some texture that I could bring out with the brown paint. Now I wanted to put some patterns on the terracotta eggs, so I took some craft foam and I just cut a triangle shape, and I used hot glue to glue that to the end of a pencil that no longer had a working eraser. And now I'm going to use the Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint in the sheepskin color, which is one of my favorite off-white colors, and use that to stamp some different patterns onto the terracotta colored eggs with the stamp that we just made out of the craft foam. So one pattern that I'm going to make is just a pattern around the middle of the egg with the triangles alternating, pointing up and down. And then once I finished painting those around the egg, I took the end of a paintbrush and dipped that in the paint and just made dots over the bottoms of the triangles. Now, many of the eggs I just painted with that sheepskin paint, and I painted those, first of all, because I like the color, and second, because I thought that they would look nice mixed in the bowl with the terracotta eggs that are painted with the sheepskin paint as a little embellishment. So I thought that together they would look nice and it would help highlight the painting on the terracotta eggs. Now I did a couple of other patterns with the triangle stamp. On one of the larger eggs, I did this pattern which was sort of a pyramid with 3 triangles at the bottom, then 2, then 1, and then a reflected pyramid. And I did that on 2 sides of the egg. And then I also did a pattern which was just sort of these sets of 3 triangles together. And I really liked the way that looked. I alternated what direction the triangles were pointing, but I thought that that was a really cool pattern. Now this next craft is maybe a little bit more ambitious. I wanted to make some sort of llama-shaped bowl, and I do want to shout out to one of my commenters, Mary, who told me that her daughter likes llamas. I really like llamas too, so I really wanted to make this craft. So what I have here are these mini round bowls. It comes in a set of 6. They are little plastic bowls, and you can get them in the party section at the Dollar Tree. And I'm going to use these for the bowl part, for the armature of the llama. I'm also going to use tin foil, masking tape, and a little bit of 22 gauge florist's wire. Finally, I'm going to use this wood bead wreath. I'm going to use 4 beads from that for each llama. So I just used some needle nose pliers to open up the wreath so I could take the beads off. And the beads are all slightly different sizes and shapes, so I tried to find 4 that were roughly the same size and shape. And those are going to be the feet or legs of the llama. And I hot glued those onto the bottom of the bowl. Now the bottom of the bowl is not flat, so I just filled in the depression there with some hot glue first to make it flat, because I did want to spread the beads out a little bit. I didn't want them within that circle on the bottom. And then I just glued the beads on. And then I needed to create basically a llama neck and head, and I used pieces of tin foil for that. And I did initially hot glue those to the bowl and to each other to help me hold it together while I was making it. And that was just sort of a lot of trial and error and looking at pictures of llamas to try to get a profile that would be recognizable as a llama. This is going to be fairly abstract, so I felt that getting the shape of that correct was pretty important. And then I used masking tape just to sort of hold that together once I had created it. Now, with that llama head and neck on the front of the bowl, it unbalances the bowl. So I did add some tin foil to the back of the bowl opposite the llama head to give it some more balance. Now I am going to add some ears to the llama, or to the armature for the llama, using some small pieces of 22 gauge florist's wire. But before I did that, I did make some homemade model magic to mold around this llama bowl. So to make the homemade model magic or air dry clay, I used a ½ cup of baking soda, a ¼ cup of cornstarch, and a ¼ cup of water. And you heat that on the stove, stirring constantly, and literally only took less than 2 minutes for it to form into clay. That amount of clay, a ½ cup of baking soda and a ¼ cup of cornstarch and water, was a perfect amount for one llama bowl. So I did do this twice. I did make the clay twice. I did make 2 bowl armatures, so I made 2 of these. But the amount of clay was really good for one. Now, my clay was just a little bit dry, so I did add some water to the clay once I started molding with it, and that worked fine. When I made the second batch, I put a little bit more water in when I made it, and it's possible I just measured out that ¼ cup incorrectly, or it's possible that because it's winter and it's very dry that it just dried out more quickly, but you can always adjust it by adding a little bit more water if it's too dry and it's not holding together well. And here you can see how I made the ears. I just basically made loops with the wire, and then I used the masking tape to attach that to the head. Now, once I have that armature all done, I just covered it with the clay, and I tried to keep the clay as thin as possible, but there were places where I wanted to build it up a little more to improve the shape of the llama. And especially on the back, I needed to keep it balanced because, of course, as I added clay to the front, it got heavier on the front, and I needed to add more clay to the back. But that is basically what I did. I just covered the entire thing except for the little feet with clay, because I did want the little feet to not be covered with clay. And originally I wanted to keep them tan, the color that the beads are, but they didn't react well with the clay. I think maybe I should have finished them first if I had wanted to use them as they were, because perhaps the dampness in the clay, I'm not sure. They ended up looking very messy when I was done, and that's why in the end I ended up painting them. Now, a few tips with the clay. So first of all, I didn't use all of the clay, I used most of it. I reserved a little bit to fill in cracks after the clay had dried. Once I had put the clay on the bowl and it was completely covered, it was easier to work with once the bowl was completely covered. And then I would wet my finger and just rub it over the clay to smooth it out. So it's not completely smooth, but I was able to smooth it quite a bit just with a little bit of water. And then again, once it had dried, I would just take little bits of the clay that was left. You should wrap it tightly in plastic wrap and fill in cracks as they formed. And this allowed me to fill in most of the cracks. So the final product did not have cracks in it. I have always had trouble with both the Model Magic that you purchase and this homemade air dry clay cracking. And this is the first time that I've tried filling in the cracks with a little bit of leftover clay once it has dried. And it did keep cracking. I did have to do that several times, but eventually I got something that was mostly filled in. Once it had completely dried, I sanded it a little bit with 60 grit sanding paper and a sanding block that I purchased from the Dollar Tree. I did not get it completely smooth. My goal wasn't to get it completely smooth. I did want it to look handmade, but I didn't want there to be any sort of seams or places that looked crumbly or messy, so I did my best to make it look like a smooth clay pot. Once I sanded both llamas, I wiped them off with a damp towel to remove any dust, and then I sealed them both with a coat of matte Mod Podge. Now there are so many options for how you could paint these. And I would say look to the clay look eggs. You could paint them a terracotta color, or you could paint them in bright colors. You could paint them in spring colors. What I wanted to do was to paint them with the Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint in sheepskin, and then do a little bit of embellishment in a turquoise color. So I started with the sheepskin, and then I used one of my favorite turquoise colors, which is the Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint in Grotto. And what I decided to do for embellishment was to do a sort of a wave pattern around the top of the bowl, and then use the end of the paintbrush to put little dots inside there. And in one spot I didn't do a very neat job with the wave. It's hard to make that connect up well, like to get it nice and even all the way around, so I did just touch it up with some of the sheepskin paint. But then I used the end of the paintbrush to put dots between all of those little loops in the wave. And then I thought it would look good if I painted sort of the top of the rim of the bowl. So I sort of outlined that with the grotto. I decided to paint the inside of the ears because I thought it needed something up on the head, but I really did want it to be abstract, so I didn't want to put on eyes or features. And then I painted the little feet. Now again, if I had already planned to do this, I would have painted the feet before I glued them on, and I probably would have tried to cover them up while I was working with the Model Magic, but I was just sort of figuring this one out as I went along. And I did not seal the whole thing with another coat of Mod Podge, but maybe I should. I don't think it would be a bad idea to go back in and seal it with Mod Podge. It's not going to make it shiny if you use the matte Mod Podge, and it will protect the paint. Now our final craft is the turquoise look eggs, and I'll show you the process that I followed, and maybe you'll have suggestions for how to do this better. I thought that the way it came out was okay, but I think that maybe it could have come out better, and I'm not sure how. So for this one, I used the styrofoam eggs from the Dollar Tree, and I did put Mod Podge on one of them and then realized that that really wasn't going to be necessary, so I didn't do any sealing for most of these before I started painting. And I stuck toothpicks in the bottom of them, and I have a piece of styrofoam here which was some packaging from something, and I used that to dry them, so I stuck the other end of the toothpicks in the packaging to dry them. Now I have some jewelry here, and I'm pretty sure the bracelet is real turquoise. I don't know about the necklace, I don't know what those stones are, but I really like the light blue stones in the necklace, so that was the turquoise or blue rock that I was trying to imitate with these eggs. And I looked over all of the blue paints that I have, and I decided that this Delta Ceramcoat Caribbean blue came closest to the blue rocks that I wanted to imitate. But you might prefer a darker turquoise color or a more green turquoise color, or maybe there's a paint that you have that would look much better or would imitate turquoise better. This is the paint that I used, and I did mix a little bit of apple barrel acrylic white into that because I felt like it was just a little bit too bright. So then the first thing I did was just to completely cover the eggs in that paint, and it did need a second coat in some places, so I didn't get a complete coverage with the first coat. And then the next thing I wanted to do was to trace on those sort of veins that you get in turquoise. And I wanted to do them in a sort of a brown and then go over that with black, because if you look at them, they have some depth, and I was hoping that the brown would give them some depth. So I began with this burnt umber and just sort of tried to paint veins onto the eggs. And I used the little stones in the necklace that I have as a guide for how to paint those veins. And once those had dried, I took apple barrel acrylic paint in black and painted over mostly the centers of those veins because I wanted a little bit of the brown to show through. I wasn't thrilled with how that looked at all, so then I watered down the blue and white paint mixture, painted it over, and then sort of dabbed it off just to sort of kind of tone that down. But finally I decided that really what was wrong with it was that there was no real depth to those veins. So I took a toothpick and I basically hollowed out where the veins are, and then I took the black paint and tried to paint into those veins. I watered it down and painted into the veins. But here's where I think I probably had the most success, was where I let that black paint sort of run over the egg a little bit and then wiped it off, because it gave it a sort of a blurry look that I think was much more authentic. And I stopped there. I decided that was close enough, and I wasn't sure how to improve it. So then I simply gave them a coat of Mod Podge to seal all of that in. And what I decided was that would look more like turquoise if it were next to something that looked like it was silver. So I decided to use this Folk Art Metallic Silver Sterling paint. Now this paint does not look so good going on, but once it dries, it looks very silvery. So I painted several more eggs with this sterling silver paint color. And then finally I thought, let's just put a little sort of garland of silver beads in the bowl with the eggs. And I used to make jewelry sometimes a long time ago, not well, but I have these tiny silver beads, and I had some longer, small silver beads, I mean silver colored, they're not silver, and I had some larger ones. I also have this silver florist wire from the Dollar Tree, so I just strung some of those beads in a pattern on the florist's wire. And then I put all of it into a bowl that is actually a pewter bowl, but I polished it up as best I could. And I thought that with the pewter bowl and the silver eggs and the silver garland, that it did give a look of turquoise and silver. And so here's the whole collection of my Southwestern spring or Easter crafts.
So what did you think of our Southwestern themed spring or Easter decor? Did you have a favorite craft or maybe one that you would like to try? Please tell me in the comments. I think that I was really pleased with how these llama bowls came out. I wasn't sure if I would be able to make something that worked or that balanced, but I was able to do it. I also liked these pottery-look eggs, and in particular, I liked the painting technique with the stamp that we made from the craft foam, and I liked this pattern. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.